And then broadcasting. Good evening. This is Andy Port. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the City of Newburyport. I'm the Zoom moderator and technical host for tonight's meeting. There is an option for the general public who's here tonight and applicants if need be to raise your hand. There's a raise hand feature in Zoom. If you go to the bottom of the screen and move your cursor to click that raise hand button. As indicated on the screen, the chair or I will call upon you and let you speak at the appropriate time. So with that, I'll leave it to the chair to run the meeting as normal.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rob Ciampetti, Chairman of the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals, and we're going to jump into our meeting scheduled for this evening, May 26th. And obviously, as Andy just pointed out, it will be done virtually, and if there's any questions just along the way, just feel free to click the button at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, and we'll acknowledge you, and Andy will be able to unmute your mic so that whomever wishes to speak is able to speak. We're going to begin by going through the agenda, and just as an FYI, everything that's on the agenda is also linked to materials, supporting materials for each application, as well as the items that are on the business meeting, the minutes, and all supporting documentations, plans, and other materials. So if you are following along remotely to this meeting and you wish to click onto materials, Andy Port will be, as the moderator, he'll be putting up everything that's being referenced or spoken about, but you're also able to do that independently by just going to the city's website and clicking on the agenda, then click onto the application that interests you, and the materials will be there in PDF for you to review. So noting the time is now 7:03, we are published to begin at 7 o'clock. So we're going to begin by calling the roll. The way this will work remotely, normally when we're in a room, we enlist the help of our secretary, Mr. Moore, to call the roll. But here I'm just going to read through our list of members, and each member who is in attendance, please respond by simply saying aye. And once we have a quorum, we can move into the business meeting. I'll go over the sequence of how the meetings run just before we start our first public hearing. But first, we're going to call the roll. Then we'll have a business meeting where we approve the minutes. There's nothing else on our business meeting, so we can go right into public hearings from there. Okay, calling the roll for the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for May 26, 2020. Mr. Cameron.
Here.
Mr. Moore.
Here.
Mr. Delisle.
Here.
Ms. Webb. Looks like Rachel Webb's not. Is Rachel logged on yet, Andy? Can you tell? Andy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I don't see her at present, but I will notify you if she does join for any reason and you don't notice it. Yep.
I thought I saw it. I thought I saw it pop up. Okay, apologies. So we'll circle back on Rachel. We'll report not here at the moment. Mr. Swanton.
Here.
And Mr. Channing.
Here.
And Rob Ciampetti, Chairman, here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 6 in attendance, and Rachel Webb yet to log on. So we have a quorum. Just noting for the record, if we need to have an alternate vote, I believe Mr. Channing was our alternate last meetings. I believe that Mr. Swanton was our alternate voting at the last meeting. So this meeting, Mr. Channing will be our voting member. Moving along, then we have the business meeting, approval of the minutes. The minutes have been published and are all, I think, in our inbox and available to the members of the public that are listening as well via the city's website. Minutes of the meeting of 5/12. Do we have any questions, changes, anything that needs attention? Hearing no responses, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move we approve the minutes. This is Ken Swanton.
Mark Moore, seconded.
Okay, motion's made by Mr. Swanton and seconded by Mr. Moore. Calling the roll, and you can just respond in the affirmative by saying aye. Mr. Cameron.
Aye.
Mr. Moore.
Aye.
Mr. Delisle.
Aye.
Mr. Swanton.
Aye, but actually, I don't think I should be voting or moving the motion, should I?
Oh, you can. This is the business meeting, so it's only the public hearings that you're either a voting alternate or a non-voting alternate. But
Okay,
you,
thank you. I'll vote
yeah.
aye.
And Mr. Channing
Aye.
and Rob Champetti, I vote aye. All the motion carries, and the minutes are approved. So we can move along to our public hearings. And before we do that, I'm going to just take a quick moment and introduce the members of the board to the members of the public that are here. It's a little bit obtuse because, obviously no one can see anyone, and you have to look at a list of participants to understand, where you are and who else is here. But we'll do a quick introduction of the board, and then I'll walk through the quick format of how the meeting will be run, and then we'll jump right into business. So the members in attendance that you've heard from, Mr. Ed Cameron is our vice chair, Mr. Moore, our secretary, Mr. Delisle, voting member, Rachel Webb, who hasn't logged on just yet, but is also a voting member, though she's absent at the moment. Mr. Swanton, an alternate, will be sitting out this hearing, and Mr. Chanyon, an alternate, will be our voting alternate. My name is Rob Champetti, and I'm the chairman. And so the way these meetings will work, for those of you who are not familiar with ZBA or other Newburyport city hearings and public hearings and meetings, we will go into the public hearing section. We will start each application in the sequence shown on the agenda, and we'll read the name of the application by name of the applicant, as well as the street address, and then just the description that's on the agenda as to what is being applied for of the ZBA. At which point we will then open up the floor to the applicant or the applicant's representative or engineer, attorney, architect, or all of the above will then make the presentation to the board of their application, at which point, at the point at which they are completed, we then move to the audience section or the public hearing section, where I will ask if there's anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in support of the application. We'll then move to anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the application. And in either situation, we just ask that you kindly give your name and your address for our minute taker, who's Miss Gretchen Joy. I'll also note that in attendance is Andy Port, our city planner, our planning director. And we also have Caitlin Sullivan in attendance, our city planner. So if you can just give your first name and last name and your address for Miss Joy to keep the minutes, that would be great. If you're not sure whether you're in support of or in opposition to an application, just please pick one and feel free to share your thoughts. Make sure that your voice is heard and your comments are received by the board members. It doesn't matter which section you choose to speak in, as long as you feel free to choose to speak if that's what you wish to do. We'll then go to questions from the board. This is the section of the hearing when the members of the board will ask questions of either the applicant or the applicant's representatives. They will also, having heard folks who may have spoken in support or in opposition to an application, they will use that as a platform to carry forward those questions in the form of a board member's question to the applicant or whomever. So for members of the public, feel free to note that your questions are taken into account very seriously, and we try to envelop them by passing them forward if it raises questions in the minds of any of the members of the board. After the questions from the board, we close that section of the hearing. We go to deliberations. Deliberations are really essentially where you get to listen to us think out loud in the spirit of full transparency and full open meeting. We discuss the matters, we ponder and contemplate and question ourselves, each other, maybe further questions of members of the application, members that have presented in favor of an application. This is where the board members deliberate the legal standard by which they have to make a decision. At the close of that, the board will then move to a vote. Under the Robert's Rules of Order, all motions to vote are made in the affirmative. So a motion will sound like a motion to approve, X, Y, Z. That doesn't necessarily mean that member is voting that way. It's just how Robert's Rules has us frame it. At which point the motion must be seconded, and then it goes to a full roll call. I call the roll, and for the application to prevail, it has to have at least 4 members voting in the affirmative. I believe that's it. So we can move on now to the public hearing section, and we will go to the first application that's on our agenda. And I believe that we have the first two that are being continued to our next meeting. And Caitlin, can you just confirm on 468th Street? Do we have a request from the applicant, Ryan McShara, Red Barn Architecture, to continue that to the next meeting of 6/8?
Let's see, 6/9.
Oh, sorry, that's right, 6/9. Okay, is there anyone here from that application that wishes to speak, or may the board just move toward a motion to continue that matter on the request?
Mr. Chair, we have no one in the audience who's raised a hand, but I believe the
Okay.
request is sufficient.
Okay, so we'll move then. Do we have a motion to continue the application of 468th Street, special permit for nonconformities, to the meeting of 6/9?
So moved by Ed Cameron.
Seconded, Mark Moore.
Motion's made by Ed Cameron and seconded by Mr. Moore. Let's see, Mr. Cameron. We just need a yay or
Yes.
nay vote on the
Yep,
motion.
sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Muting
Sorry,
our meeting.
sorry
Yes.
about that.
I'll be more astute.
That's okay. So calling the roll, we have Mr. Cameron. Mr. Cameron votes yay. Mr. Moore,
Yay.
Mr. Delisle.
Yay.
And let me just see, is Rachel here? Ms.
Yes.
Webb is in attendance. Ms. Webb,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Chanyon.
Yes.
Rob Champetti votes yes, seven in the affirmative. The motion carries and the matter is continued to the meeting of 6/9. Moving on to the second matter on the agenda, Redco Construction, Inc., care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman, and Costa on 3-5 School Street. This also is a request to continue to the meeting of 6/9. I see that Attorney Mead is here, but I'll just ask the quick question. Attorney Mead, do you wish to speak at all, or may we just proceed with a roll call on the motion?
You may proceed. Thank you for asking.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so do we have a motion to continue the matter of 3-5 School Street to the meeting of 6/9?
So moved. Ed Cameron.
Seconded, Mark Moore.
Motion's made by Mr. Cameron and seconded by Mr. Moore. We'll call the roll and just respond in the affirmative or in the negative. Mr. Cameron,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Delisle,
Yes.
Ms. Webb,
Yes.
Ms. Swanton, Mr. Swanton, sorry about that. Mr. Chanyon,
Yes.
Mr. Champetti, I vote yes. 7 in the affirmative. The motion carries. The matter is continued to 6/9. Moving now to the first substantive matter that's on our agenda that appears to be going forward. That is the application of Michael J. Gray, 12 Harrison Street, docket 2020-037, a special permit for nonconformities. The applicant is applying for renovations and alterations to include reverting pre-existing non-conforming two-family home to a single family and replacing the gambrel roof line and L at the rear at a higher elevation. May we hear from the applicant?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Mark Griffin, I'm an attorney at Finneran and Nicholson, 30 Green Street, Newburyport, Mass., representing Michael Gray in this application for a special permit for nonconformities. So this application has to do with a property. Obviously, it's on 12 Harrison Street. It is an existing two-family home, and it's in the DCOD and also in the R2 zoning district. The home is in, I would say, poor condition. It is, however, an historic home, built in or about 1750 to 1800, and is contributing to the Newburyport Historic District. It's located on a pre-existing legally non-conforming lot, and it's situated on that lot, which has almost 8,000 square feet of lot area. 15,000 is required, so the lot is pre-existing non-conforming for that two-family use. It has 138 feet of street frontage, which is significant for that district, and more than is required for a two-family use, actually, because 120 is needed. It's also legally non-conforming with respect to 2 of the setbacks. So the front, actually more than 2 of the setbacks, but there's only 2 in issue with this application. The front is 3 feet where 25 is required, and the rear is 6.8 where 25 is required, and the northeasterly side setback is 12.7 where 20 is required. It meets all other dimensional requirements. The proposal here is actually to go from a 2-family to a 1-family use. So basically minimizing the impact and removing 1 dwelling unit. That will be done in the interior. Everything is essentially within the existing footprint, the construction that's being done. The roof line originally, with the original plans that were on file, was proposed to be raised by 3 feet on the gambrel roof and also in the L. And that was going to be expanded upward over what exists. And the upward over what exists would require a special permit for nonconformities because of the intensification of the front and rear setback. So the original plan was filed with the Newburyport Historical Commission because they had jurisdiction over the roof line change. And so the zoning board, first zoning board hearing was continued in order to have the Historical Commission rule on this. As noted in the staff report that was generated by the planning office, the Historical Commission at their last hearing voted to release this for the demolition permit. But it was released based on the amended plans. So the petitioner made some significant aesthetic changes to the exterior, none of which affect the footprint of the proposal, but much to do with the exterior. And the architect, Barry Gannick, is here this evening, and he can describe some of those changes that were made. And the roof line also was lowered from 3 feet to a 1.5 foot increase. So basically, this is a 1.5 foot raising of the roof above non-conforming setbacks. No additional non-conformity being created going outside the existing footprint. Also part of the construction is a garage, shed/garage that's existing now, will be removed and replaced by a new garage, which complies with dimensional zoning, so does not require any additional permitting. This is, I mentioned in the DCOD, but based on the fact that we're not removing exterior building walls, the DCOD was not triggered for this application. And at this point, I think if Barry Gannick is here, I think I'll turn it over to him to just describe the petitioner's plan for a moment, and then come back to me and I'll wrap up.
Very good.
Okay. This is Barry Gannick. I'm here, Gannick Architects, One River Road in Carlisle, Mass. And the intent on this project is to renovate this building and restore it to an attractive, lower density use, obviously, with the single family. We are working within the existing footprint of the main house. And in fact, we are reducing somewhat by removing the fire escape that was on the back of the house and not very attractive. And that's the key. The whole building will be much more suitable to the neighborhood, much more of an asset, certainly in appearance and value to the town. We're restoring materials that weren't there. The roof lines are very important. That we are replacing the gambrel forms that had been there but had been removed. Yes, as you can see on this drawing, on both the front main part of the original house and the rear wing that we are restoring. Like materials, clapboard siding, new windows will be 6/6 as shown in this drawing, making the house much more substantial, repairing foundations where we have to, and even reinforcing areas that didn't need quite as much work. It's an asset to the whole town and the neighborhood, certainly. That's pretty much it.
So, Mr. Chairman, it's Mark Griffin again. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Mark. Thank you.
I'm still unmuted, great. So again, this is a special permit for nonconformities, and under the criteria under section 9B2A of the zoning ordinance, the applicant needs to show that there's no addition of a new nonconformity. And as you've seen from the plans, there has been no addition of new nonconformity. There's no invasion of any pre-existing nonconforming setback, staying within the existing footprint, although extending upward from the nonconforming setback. And then number two, what we need to also prove is that the change won't be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing nonconforming structure or use. Well, I think both the use and the structure are going to be improved by this project. So first of all, the use currently is a 2-family. It's going down to a 1-family, so significantly less impact there, less issues with traffic coming in and going, and less issues with the potential of parking on street. And so with respect to the structure itself, you heard from Mr. Ganick, and you can see the rendering and also the exterior elevation drawings. And you can see that this is actually going to be an improvement from what is there now. And so aesthetics aside, you're also going to see an improvement in the dimensional aspects of this property. And that is a little bit quirky, but it's because we're going from a 2-family to a 1-family use, and therefore the dimensional requirements are decreased. And so the lot area is going to be less non-conforming, going down from lot area requirement, I should say, less non-conforming, so going from 15,000 to 10,000, and then the side setbacks are reduced from 20 to 10, which actually, by happenstance, brings the northeasterly setback into conformity. So clearly making this property, more conforming. This, construction is not something that's going to have a significant amount of impact on or adverse impact on neighboring properties. I'd point out that none of the neighbors have showed up in opposition to any of this throughout the historical commission, and we believe that none will be opposing this evening as well. So for all of the foregoing reasons, we submit that this is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing use or structure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Griffin. Again, Chairman Rob Ciampetti. We are now at the section where we'll ask anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in support of the application. And again, please just give your name and address for Ms. Joy, the note taker. Anyone wish to speak in support? Seeing no hands up. Anyone wish to speak in opposition? Anyone wish to speak in opposition? I see 2 hands up. Andy, do you want to?
Sure. First off, Stephanie Nikitic.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you, Chair Ciampetti. So this is the Benjamin Lunt House. As noted, it is contributory to the Newburyport Historic District, and not all buildings, unfortunately, have a Form B, but this one was fine enough when the Newburyport Historic District was being created for it to actually get an inventory Form B, where it's called a fine example of a Georgian house. It is visible, publicly visible from both the street and the rail trail. I will leave aside comments about what kind of condition it is in as an original building, but I oppose raising the roof even 1.5 feet. And I oppose roof decks, which detract from its historical significance. If you note, so it's true, this is there was not enough demolition for this to be a DCOD special permit, but it was a demolition delay, and it's notable to me that there were 2 public hearings for this. Both of them were under the pandemic conditions of Zoom meetings. And if you read the 2 memos you got from the Historical Commission, the chairman notes that it was a factor in how this went with that commission. In the second public hearing, Attorney Griffin was introduced. He argued with the commission over their authority under demolition delay to make decisions about anything. And even though Mr. Port argued back, what the Historical Commission heard was that they really had nothing to say here. And I believe that's the reason that they simply, just said, okay, we release this for demolition delay in the areas involved, which were the roof line, even though their purview under demolition delay covered much more. So I think that the memos you've gotten from the Historical Commission contain additional recommendations from them, which are now not specified conditions, which they could have been if they had imposed demolition delay. So I hope that you will seriously consider their other recommendations. And I have to say, I disagree with the release of the demolition delay for raising the roof of this house 1.5 feet and for roof decks, which really are not appropriate to building with this history. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Patricia Technic.
Patricia Technic for Dove Street. Can you hear me?
We can, Ms. Pecknick.
Okay, thank you. Just something to think about on this proposal is that, coastal New England cities have been struggling with this issue of roof decks in historic neighborhoods. For example, Newport, Rhode Island permits them on restaurant and hotel properties in the commercial waterfront district, but not in residential areas of 18th and 19th century houses. And I think that makes a lot of sense from a planning perspective. Portsmouth learned the hard way that street front decks created a lot of visual clutter on the streetscape. They kind of loom down. And so they now don't allow decks at focal points or when visible from a public way. They consider decks a late, 20th century intrusion into these neighborhoods and substantially more detrimental than either an open or an enclosed porch. Decks like this provide a private benefit, but I would argue at a public cost. So although direct abutters have not objected, the public users of the rail trail might. It's been very difficult to gauge that sort of thing because of this remote format. But I think the city invested a lot of labor and money into installing these privacy fences all along the rail trail. And so to begin to permit decks to line the trail will have a strong impact there. Of more concern than the rear deck on the highly visible elevation there is the deck sitting right on Harrison Street. I don't think we've seen this in the DCOD. I can't imagine that decks fronting High Street or Federal Street would be permitted, and I don't consider Harrison Street any less special a place than those streets. If this is the direction that the city wants to take on decks, then so be it. But please consider not approving this time something that you might not want to approve 50 more times. I think that Newburyport with street fronting roof decks would be a very different place. And I just ask that you stop to visualize what that would look like. Finally, I have a lot of respect for the work that you're doing, especially in these remote meetings, which are terribly difficult. And I wish you the best in your deliberations on this application. Thanks for the chance to speak.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pecknick. Is there, it looks like there's another hand, Andy?
Yes, we have Glenn, I believe Richards, is that right?
Yes. Yeah, Glenn Richards, 6 Kent Street, and also chair of the Historical Commission. Wanted to just mention a couple words since the hearings at the Historical Commission came up. Unfortunately, I did send a report or generated a couple of reports, which I shared with the chair. I don't know if you folks had a chance to review them. It's a little bit of a complicated situation, but anyway, the bottom line is, we took a look, and I'm speaking here more for myself. I'm not really speaking for the commission, but I think most of the commission had similar feelings that this house, as you can see if you look at the plans of the existing, it was very unfortunately dealt some pretty nasty blows renovation-wise when it was converted to two-family, and the roof line was really massacred and all that. So we look at the existing, we look at the proposed. At the first hearing, there were some odd things that we discussed with Mr. Gray, I believe it is the owner, and he was one of the things that encouraged us. It was that he was very willing to work with the Historic Commission and accommodate our suggestions to improve his design. So that was good. But partly as a result of that, when he came back a second time, we were frankly kind of shocked that although in the first hearing, we didn't flatly rule out roof decks, but we spoke out, kind of cautioned against them. And from the first plan to the second plan, the roof deck, there was an additional roof deck that wasn't even there in the first plan. So that was rather shocking. Anyway, so we're trying to balance the fact that a lot of the work that the applicant is doing does, I wouldn't contradict what the architect and Attorney Griffin has said, that in fact it does improve the lines. I do. We definitely had some concerns about taking that gambrel roof and raising it 3 feet. If it was my preference, I'd prefer not to raise it at all. I'm not sure if that was necessitated by the whole roof deck thing. I suspect it was necessitated by wanting to get more use out of the 3rd floor. A lot of these old houses kind of had it was really a garret or an attic in the 3rd floor, not a full use floor. At any rate, long story short, we felt that on balance, we had made a lot of suggestions. He adopted our suggestions. He was willing to take the suggestions we made at the second meeting about the width of the corner boards and little details that would make it more authentically blend in. But I would echo Ms. Technic's comments. She's also on the Historical Commission. That the roof decks, we really have reservations about those. They're very visible from the rail trail, and the one on the left-hand side as you're facing the front will be quite visible from Harrison Street as well. So, I would echo her comments about the appropriateness of those. They just and also the comments about setting a precedent that we might not want to do. So I'll leave it up to you folks to weigh that one. But my whole point in speaking is to try to explain our rationale and why we did decide to allow the project to go forward despite some of these various reservations. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Let's see, were there any other hands, anyone else wishing to speak in opposition or speak at all with respect to this application? Any new hands? Seeing none?
Seeing none.
Okay, then we'll move on to the next segment of the hearing, questions from the board. Anyone of the members of the ZBA wish to pose any questions of either Attorney Griffin or Mr. Ganock, the architect, or any other questions, feel free to jump in.
And I would note here for the record that Mark Griffin is also raising his hand. He may have some answers to questions and comments that were raised previously.
Okay.
This is Ed Cameron. Could I go?
May I speak? Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
You can answer this one as well as whatever you were going to say. Could the architect or Attorney Griffin just talk about why the roof line needs to be raised from an architectural perspective? Are you trying to get more headroom in there somewhere?
Yes, this is Barry Ganick. It's for exactly that, for headroom inside.
Thank you.
May I speak to some of the comments that were made? This is
Go
Mark.
ahead.
This is Mark Griffin. So I did mention that, that we hadn't had any opposition from the neighborhood. And even though we had some opposition, I was correct. It's not from the neighborhood. Obviously, none of the three people that spoke live nearby or are in the neighborhood. That being said, whether the board, or excuse me, the commission has reservations about what they approved is really not relevant once they've approved it. You could say the same thing with the Zoning Board of Appeals. After you've voted, that's your approval. So I might point out, of the two commission members that spoke tonight, one of them voted yes. So, this was a roofline change that didn't actually get approved in a vacuum. It got approved in addition to the applicant making a significant number of other exterior changes. And if you look at the Historical Commission report on the approval vote, you'll see what was done and what was agreed to. So although the roof decks remained, significant other aesthetic changes were made from the first plan to the second. And the report itself said that basically, since the applicant expressed willingness to consider recommendations by the commission designed to make the project results more historically accurate and period appropriate, the motion was made to allow the project. And so, they may have reservations now. I would respectfully submit that, the Historical Commission's vote takes care of the issue of the roofline change. The ZBA now has to determine whether the construction is substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing structure. And I would submit that the roof decks do not constitute a substantial detriment to the neighborhood based on the really minimal impact that this addition has to the neighborhood. Also, again, reducing from 2-family to 1-family and no additional expansion of the footprint. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, Attorney Griffin, thank you. Pardon me. Are there any other questions from the board? Hearing none.
Hey, Rob, it's Mark. I have a couple of questions.
Oh, please, go ahead.
For Attorney Griffin, so you mentioned that there were some things that you agreed to in the revised plans. It was the rise the overall roof height 1.5 feet down from 3, brackets off the fascia, clapboards 4-inch exposure, no brick or shiplap. Windows are 6/6. I see that now. And then there were some additional things that we got as recommendations, and I wonder if those had ever been discussed in the meeting with you. You may have seen them with considering 12/8 windows in the original structure, which I think is ship might have sailed because I see the 6/6 installed already. No shutters on the original structure, and the vertical corner boards being only 5 to 6 inches wide. Was there an agreement there in any way, shape, or form?
I'm going to let Mr. Ganick answer that question, please.
Okay.
We reduced the size of the corner boards as requested.
Okay.
I honestly don't remember a request to remove the shutters.
Okay.
And the number of lights in the window is a cost factor. It's dramatically more expensive to get to 12 light units, 12/8.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Moore, did you have a follow-on question as well, or additional questions?
I believe that's it right now.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board? Any other questions?
Rob, this is Bud Shagnon. I just wanted to ask the applicant, are the existing windows 6/6 as the house stands before renovations began?
They were 1/1.
They were 1/1. Okay, thank you.
This is Stephen Delisle. I have a question for either Mr. Griffin or Mr. Gannick. Is there an existing roof deck on that flat two-story addition that runs, perpendicular or excuse me, parallel to Harrison Street? Is there an existing roof deck there?
No, it is a nearly flat roof, just pitched to drain water at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay. Was there anything else? Mr. Delisle, anything further?
No, thank you.
Okay. Any other member of the ZBA wish to ask any questions? The applicant or Mr. Gannick or anyone else? All right. Let's see. We have.
What, actually, I do have a question.
Go ahead, Rachel.
I'm just curious, what is the, where the proposed garage is located? Is that the same footprint as the shed that's there now?
No.
What is the dimensional difference there? I mean, I know it's not within the side yard setbacks and all that. I'm just curious.
I think it's a 22 by 24
Oh, I see now.
garage, yeah.
Okay.
You can see the size of the footprint
Yeah.
of the existing one. So
Okay.
it's slightly bigger.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Ms. Webb?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right. Moving on. Anyone else wish to ask any questions? Last call for members of the board on questions to the applicant. Seeing none, we'll now move into deliberations. And as we do, let me bear with me just a second. I want to pull up the staff report. Okay, so because we are considering a special permit for nonconformities, and I believe the applicant pointed this out as well, the board must find that there will be no addition of a new nonconformity in order to grant a special permit for nonconformities. And they must find, we as a board must also find that the proposed addition will not create a new nonconformity. The second prong of that is that we must also as a board find that the application will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing nonconforming use or structure. And we may consider factors such as size, scale, massing, volume as compared to other structures in the neighborhood. And that's under 9B2 of the zoning code. So as we deliberate, we should just guide our deliberations along those lines for criteria. Anyone wish to jump in on deliberations?
I'll start, Mr. Chair. This is Stephen Delisle. I will say that I am a little bit concerned about the roof deck on the left-hand side. If you're looking at the structure, I have a memory of other hearings where we as a board had required some sort of screening or something on roof decks that looked out onto the public way. Maybe that might be appropriate here. I think that's my greatest reservation with this project. I think that by and large, the rest of it is quite nice. Thank you.
Okay. Further deliberations, and again, keep in mind the criteria for special permit if we could. Anyone wish to jump in?
This is Ken Swanton. If I could jump in. I too, like Mr. Delisle, have a concern about the roof decks as my primary concern. And I think one of the people in the comment mentioned what would be like if all the houses began to have roof decks all the way along in our historic districts, particularly, some of the finer examples of like this one. I echo Mr. Delisle's concern in that regard.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Further deliberations. I'll just kind of go through our slate of members. Mr. Cameron, anything you wish to to just add in the deliberations?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I would second what the previous two members said. And for me, yeah, the roof line is not that much of an issue. The new garage structure, that seems fine. But it is particularly that roof deck to the, I guess that would be to the south, so to the left as you look at it, and also the one behind on the right. And a question for the applicant, either Attorney Griffin or the architect, were either of those roof decks in the first, I'm looking at a laptop and my phone like most of us are during this meeting. Were both roof decks there in the first iteration of this, or were they both added? And were they both added when the revised plans came through a few days ago?
This is Barry Ganick. The roof deck over the two-story addition in this view right here was added. The other roof deck was in the first iteration.
Was in the first iteration. Okay.
Correct.
So again, based on visibility to the street, I mean, it just, yeah, you don't see roof decks like this on older houses like this. So that would be my objection. Less so the one in the back on the right.
Okay. All right, Mr. Moore, anything you wish to add?
No, broken record. I echo the concern. I mean, there's no non-new conformities created as far as size, scale, massing, and volume of the main portions of the addition. The new garage, everything fits in with the neighborhood, and in my opinion, I don't think that's out of line at all. But I do tend to sympathize with the privacy issue and the fact that it's a big change from what a historic house would look like. And I'm kind of curious as to how the roof deck gets by the commission, but that's a discussion for another day. So again, that's my only drawback. Otherwise, it makes it seems to make sense given or assuming that there would be no objection to putting all the agreements into any decision if it was in the affirmative.
So if this is Rob Champetti again, so if I'm hearing you correctly, Mark, are you saying that you can support it, or that you can't support it as it stands with the roof deck? I just want to make sure I'm kind of hearing.
Yep. No, fair enough. Yeah, the roof deck is becoming a sticking point.
Okay. Before we kind of continue in deliberations, let me just ask the members of the ZBA, and feel free to just chime in once I pose this question. Is there anyone on ZBA who feels that the roof deck is not an issue for them, whether it is or isn't a new nonconformity, or whether it is or isn't substantially more detrimental? Is the roof deck not an issue for anyone? Okay, so hearing nothing, I'm assuming that the roof deck, and Ms. Webb, can you confirm, is the roof deck something that you're struggling with as well?
Yes.
Okay, and I believe we hadn't heard from Mr. Shannon.
Yeah, I'm on the fence. I guess with the historical commission's approval, it's tough, but like everyone else on the board, I do struggle with the roof deck.
Okay. Was there anyone who hasn't spoken during deliberations yet? I think we may have covered everything.
I think my client would like to speak.
Go ahead, Attorney Griffin.
I think my client, Michael Gray, would like to speak.
Go ahead, Mr. Gray.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. I mean, I know this isn't the easiest way to hold a meeting, and I do appreciate that the town or the city is allowing to do meetings like this. So I do value everybody's opinion. With that being said, though, has anybody on the zoning board gone by to see the house in the shape that it's in right now? And I know this is something that, people are going to say, well, it's not really a valid point. You're trying to steer, to what is historic, and I appreciate that. But there is a deck on the second and third floor of this that's existing right now. which was why I kind of had this, wanted to put these decks on. Otherwise I'm going to have a flat roof on that side. I mean, so what's going to be more appealing from the street or from the rail trail? A small shed roof, which looks very unthought of, or something like this.
Okay. Was there anything else, Mr. Gray?
Well, I guess, I mean, your sticking point is on the roof, and I'd really like to try to move forward so I can start construction. I mean, I've tried to work and tried to, listen to what everybody had to say and made what I thought were the right, recommendations from the historic board. But apparently it's not enough because they were allowed to come back and influence, a lot of the zoning board members, it seems like. So it's just a little frustrating.
I completely empathize, Mr. Gray, and certainly want to make sure your voice is heard as well. Was there anything else, Attorney Griffin, that you wanted to add as we kind of continue deliberation?
Well, I guess it does really undercut the value of going to the historical commission in the first place. To get a roof line change and get it approved, and then bring the approved plan to the zoning board of appeals. And then because of two members of the historical commission regretting the vote, I guess, now the zoning board of appeals is going to find that this one feature outweighs all of the other things that the applicant has done to improve this property. This one feature outweighs the architectural exterior aesthetics that are being improved. It outweighs the fact that a two-family is being converted to a one-family. It outweighs the fact that the property is being made more conforming in dimensional zoning. And it was really something that the applicant had every right to expect that would not be an issue in an application to the Zoning Board of Appeals when the Historical Commission had already voted 5-2 to approve it. So I question whether the board really is making a proper decision here in focusing on this roof deck.
Well,
I certainly don't think that it meets the standard of being substantially more detrimental than what exists. There's lawyers on the board, and they know how low a bar that is when it comes to Chapter 40A. And so, to say that one roof deck that the public can see is substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, I don't believe passes legal muster. So
I respect that. And Attorney Griffin, for kind of in all fairness, I mean, we're at the outset, and this process better than most. It's the thing we're thinking out loud. And so no, I don't believe the board's made or is imminent to make a decision one way or the other, but merely probing and prodding the elements that are before it. And I think in all fairness, we're hearing that members of the board are moved by this roof deck, and whether they would have been independent of any input from historical, is something we'll never know. I'll just say, just to add my thoughts as well. I mean, and with the greatest respect to Mr. Richards and Ms. Technic for their service and their tireless work on another city commission, and not unchallenging work, to say the least. We as a fellow, board, we have to rely on the materials that we get, and we do rely with a great deal of credibility, and it really guides and creates a lens for us as we go forward in trying to, run that through the prism of our own analysis. And so it is disruptive. When I say that with the greatest respect, just as one voting member, not as anyone else or anything else, but as just one voting member on the board, it manifests itself unintentionally, I'm sure, but it's disruptive to the process a little bit for us to get something in writing that says one thing and is the product of a vote, and then have to sort of toil on the spot, for in the big picture. Your sentiments are taken with greatest credibility and respect, of course. And we want to hear what you say we all live in the world, and so we're all inclined to change one's minds. But I think as we go through trying to do this work, it's important that we get to, that we rely on each other's votes and the reports that come out of those votes, so that we can then take the next steps that are needed and not, kind of deal with it on the fly. And I say that just sort of as just as a by the way. I will say that for me, I am, having heard that, I mean, I too am kind of share some of the troubling aesthetic components that the roof deck sort of raises. We as a board, but I don't know that it rises for me as a level sufficient to move the needle, when it comes to being either a new nonconformity, or B, that it's substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. And I know many may argue that it's detrimental, and some may have great, rationale to support it. Some of that might be aesthetic and some of it might not be. But the reality is, this standard of substantially more detrimental is a very specific legal standard. And so I'm not sure that element alone for me moves the needle to kind of undermine the integrity of what I see are other assets and attributes. I think this applicant comes to us having inherited this property, not literally, but figuratively, from a previous owner who converted it to two-family, and in doing so made certain stylistic and design choices that I don't think anyone either in attendance or panel or members of the board would have themselves done, have done in such a historically sensitive part of the city. But be that as it may, that's how this applicant comes to us. And I think, the fact that it's being rendered a single family versus a two family is an improvement, certainly for that neighborhood. So I don't know. I mean, just as one voting member, I am equally troubled, by the deck, but I just don't think that, I think that there are greater advantages that it sounds like are taking place in the adaptive sort of reuse of this property. And I don't think that, anyone has the ability to go back in time and change some of what I think we would all agree were historical, maybe material mistakes or other aesthetic choices that I don't think we would have, supported. So I'm struggling as well. I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but that's why we kind of do all this out loud. So I don't know if there's any further deliberation or whether someone wants to make a motion or whether the applicant wishes to take a pause and a step back. We would consider all of that.
Well, I guess, if all the board members are, set in their positions, that would be good to know. Has anything changed since deliberations?
Mr. Griffin, this is Stephen Delisle. I would just say that, we're not here as a board to just say okay when the historical commission says something either way. We're a board, and we hear these things, we review the papers, and we deliberate on them. And I will tell you that this deck for me was a problem from the moment I saw this 2 weeks ago or so. And I look at Harrison Street and I don't see a lot of other roof decks. And to me, that may rise to the level of substantially more detrimental when you consider that this deck compared to the other structures and lots in the neighborhood. If there are no other decks that are visible in this way on the street, then I have a problem there. So I'm not, my mind is not swayed, and I still have a strong problem with this deck.
Mr. Chair, this is Andy Port. I just wanted to note Glenn Richards, the chair of the Historical Commission, has his hand raised. He might be interested in clarifying a few things. I know there was some reference to the NHC meeting and discussion previously.
Of course.
Thank you for allowing that. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a couple of things and the characterizations from Attorney Griffin. I'm not suffering any regret from my decision, and he's quite correct. I did vote in favor. My thought process was actually very similar to what you just described, Chairman, about the overall balance of things. The applicant had made a number of changes and so on, but I would definitely disagree with the statement that they were that it was unexpected that there would be opposition to roof decks, first of all, because at the first time they appeared, the roof decks were raised as a concern. And in the second time they were before our board, there was one member I recall distinctly said, "Oh, I don't have a problem with roof decks," but virtually every other member did. So, you know, it was definitely raised as an issue. Now, but again, as I said, you know, we were kind of looking at this on balance, and it was further complicated by the fact that Attorney Griffin raised an issue of how much jurisdiction or purview, whatever you want to put it, we have over the overall design, other than strictly speaking the roof line. And he made a legal argument about that. And you know, it was the middle of a public hearing and a Zoom meeting, and I, as chair, decided that this was not the appropriate place to try to litigate that particular argument. So you know, kind of fell back to, all right, look, on balance, you know, he's doing a lot of the right things. We do have some reservations, which I put into my report, and so that's why I voted yes to let it go forward. But I, in no way, which I again still don't regret. But you know, what for me, the ideal thing is to have the project go forward, but you know, without it, especially, you know, without the deck on the south side that we've been talking about, you know, maybe the one on the other side isn't quite, certainly not visible from Harrison Street. It's just be visible from the rail trail. But anyway, I just wanted to clarify those couple of points. Thank you.
I appreciate that. This is Rob Champetti. Thank you, Chairman Richards. And I, you know, I mean, as just to dovetail on my kind of my comments on deliberations as well. I mean, I'm more, I guess I'm more sort of lenient minded when it comes to a roof deck that doesn't face the, you know, Harrison Street as much. You know, if we were discussing one roof deck over another, you know, I don't disagree with that, with the sentiment of some of my colleagues with respect to roof decks on, you know, on the main street. I just don't think in principle that a roof deck alone, just as a hypothetical element by itself, rises to that substantially more detrimental standard. But, you know, we take these in case by case matters. So that's why we have these deliberations, and that's why we have, you know, meetings such as this. But
Mr. Chairman, may I speak?
Yes, please.
This is Mark Griffin again. The roof deck that faces Harrison Street, the applicant would be willing to remove that. Would that satisfy the board?
Okay, so bear with me just for a moment, Mr. Attorney Griffin. So members of the board, the applicants you've heard looking to propose an alteration to their plan as a way to kind of soften the impact and the comments of the board. What does the board wish to do?
Hi, this is Member Cameron. That would I would vote in favor of the application.
So
modification.
Mr. Cameron, so with that modification, that sways your vote. You said that actually moves you to a more affirmative position?
Correct.
Okay. Anyone else wish to speak on whether that might or might not change anything?
This is Mr. Moore, and I can certainly support it without that deck. You know, that's assuming there's no major changes to other changes to that roof line. You know what I'm saying? Just to say that get rid of the deck without knowing what was going to happen in place of that would be an issue.
We'd keep the same design, but no more deck.
No more deck on Harrison Street.
No more deck on Harrison Street. That's the only one I'm concerned. Yep.
Right.
All right, I'd be amenable.
Yes, I agree.
This is Mr. Delisle. I would concur also.
Okay, Mr. Chanyon.
I was probably going to be okay with the deck, so with it missing, I'm in the affirmative as well.
Okay, so it seems as though that that modification is met with some favor by a member sentiment on a bit of an improvement. I agree with that as well. Does anyone else wish to speak as part of deliberations before we move to a motion on the application?
Chair, this is just Andy Port, Director of Planning and Development. I'm not sure it's a particular concern in this particular application. I know sometimes when a plan is modified on the floor and might be acted upon that night, we sometimes ask for updated drawings. I'm not necessarily convinced that's necessary in this scenario, given that it's just the removal of the railing, component there. Obviously, that would be a roof as opposed to a deck. But I just wanted to point out that sometimes that's necessary. I'm not convinced in this scenario, but it's for your consideration.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Port. Anyone else on the board wish to speak before we take up the matter for a motion? Seeing no further hands. Okay, do we have a motion to approve the application? And I would suggest that anyone making the motion should include that it would be subject to the applicant's submission of a revised plan for the planning office's records.
My sincere apologies for calling you on without.
Was somebody speaking? Somebody?
Sorry, Rachel, was that you?
No,
No.
it sounds like someone might be speaking in the background, Andy. Okay, do we have a motion? And again, framing under Robert's rules, frame the motion in the affirmative. So a motion to approve is what would be needed, and then a second.
This is Ed Cameron. I'll make the motion. So this would be a motion to approve the special permit for nonconformities for 12 Harrison Street. Application 2020-037 with revised plans to be submitted to the planning office reflecting the change to the roof deck.
This is Andy Port, Director of Planning. If I could just suggest, and if it might be a friendly amendment to that, that it be submitted prior to the issuance of a building permit.
Thank you.
That's fine. So that would be a friendly amendment to that motion, that the condition that Mr. Cameron had proposed is now added to that will be that it has to be submitted before issuance of a building permit. Okay, motion is made. Do we have a second?
Seconded, Mark Moore.
Okay, motion's made by Mr. Cameron and seconded by Mr. Moore, calling the roll and respond by yay or nay. Mr. Cameron?
Yay.
Mr. Moore?
Yay.
Mr. Delisle?
Yay.
Was that a nay or a yay?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yay, as in the affirmative.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. You cut out for a second. Ms. Webb?
Yes.
Mr. Shannon?
Yes.
And Rob Champetti, I vote yes. So that is 6 in the affirmative. The motion carries and the application with the amendment is approved for a special permit for nonconformities on 12 Harrison Street. Thank you all very much, and thank you for your comments, Mr. Richards and Ms. Technic. I know you already serve on one board. Thank you for chiming in on ours to offer your insights.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next matter, before our next matter on the agenda is the application for 37 Reservation Terrace, the application by Kim and Mark McKickta, care of Lisa Mead, attorney Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa LLC. The matter is 033 of 2020, a special permit for nonconformities to construct a 210 square foot first and second floor addition to a pre-existing non-conforming single family residence. May we hear from the applicant, Attorney Mead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Port, maybe you could bring up the presentation. And while he's doing it, Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa, 30 Green Street, Newburyport. And with me this evening are, in fact, our clients, Kim and Mark McKickta, and Eileen Graff, who is the architect on the project.
All right, apologize, just a moment. I'm just making sure we have that available in 1 second.
Thank you. So the property is at 37 Reservation Terrace on Plum Island. It's a typical Plum Island lot, just a little bit smaller than some of them, 4,285 square feet. And the applicant is proposing to remove a little bit of the structure and kind of fill in some voids in the existing structure. There's no increase in the footprint, but there is a deck that will be built over, so it does appear to increase the lot coverage. The house is currently pre-existing non-conforming. For a number of reasons, the FAR and open space are being intensified. And as a result, section 21G4B requires a special permit from the zoning board where there are alteration or reconstruction or change, where there is a floor area ratio or lot coverage nonconformity, and we're increasing those nonconformities. So the proposal is to construct a first and second floor addition to the single family residence for a total added living space of 210 square feet. And when I say addition, again, it's more of filling in the voids, which Eileen will review in a little bit. The applicant is increasing the lot coverage by 1.6% and the FAR by 0.049%. Andy, could you go to the next slide, please? So the lot is in the FEMA flood zone, AE9, and is pre-existing non-conforming for lot area and FAR. So the FAR is currently 470, and it's going to go to 519. So that's 0.470 to 0.519. The minimum lot area for the PIOD, of course, is 12,000 square feet. Thank you. And the maximum allowable lot coverage is 20%, and the existing is 22.5, and it's good to go to 24.1, but that's because that deck that you can see on the right-hand side of the plan there, that's existing, that's going to be converted to living space. So the deck that doesn't have a current roof over it doesn't count against lot coverage. And once you put a roof over it and enclose it, it does count against lot coverage. So the applicant, the minimum required side yard setback is 20 feet. The front yard setback is at 19.2. The northern side setback is at 4.4. And there is no rear setback because if you look at this plan, you can see that the house actually goes on to the next lot and has historically since before the 60s. And there is an easement that the neighbor has given them in order to accommodate for that incursion into the lot next door. That's not going to be, that will not be exacerbated. So we have received Historic Commission approval, which is noted in the staff notes for the demolition of a roof line, which Eileen will talk to you about as she goes through the plans. And so what I thought we would do, the original structure was a cottage, which was built in 1920. Sometime after 1969, there was a partial second story constructed kind of over the original cottage roof. And Eileen will go through that now, if you don't mind, Eileen.
No problem. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Eileen Graff. So this is a perfect drawing to start with. If you look at the top right drawing, that's sort of depicts that building over a building that Lisa was just touching on. So right above the three identical windows on that first floor level, you could see a roof line that was the original cottage at one point. And then when they did the addition for the second story, you could see they simply plopped it right on top. So it's definitely a very curious evolution of a cottage into expanded upon expanded footprint and building. So our goals with this project were to maintain the existing 3 bedrooms and move the living space to the second floor, at the same time aesthetically sort of unifying this exterior, this sort of hodgepodge of different roof lines, etc., so that the exterior elevations could be more attractive and more balanced to the eye. So maybe we could, if you don't mind, Andy, could we switch to an existing floor plan so that I could point out where these changes will happen? Perfect. Okay, so if we go actually to the existing second floor plan, the far right drawing, that's actually it's a second floor plan, and on the right bottom corner you can read deck. So that area right in that bottom right corner of the second floor is an area that will be filled in to become additional second floor living space. So that's one of the voids that we're talking about that will be filled in. Then if you switch to this middle drawing, the first floor plan, you'll see the front entry door, and then in front of that is a first floor deck. To the right of that is an existing sunroom. Well, we're proposing to rebuild that sunroom, which needs more substantial structural support than currently has. And we're going to just stretch the length of the sunroom towards the front door. So adding some square footage on the first floor level and by stretching that existing sunroom to be larger in footprint. There will be a new shifted location of stairs to that front door, but essentially the new added space sits on top of that existing deck, again, filling in that corner and that void space. On the back of that same middle drawing, you'll see the first floor deck. That deck there will be built slightly different footprint, but slightly reducing what it currently covers. And then if we could switch now to the proposed exterior elevations. Great. So if we start with the top left drawing, that's the front elevation. So this existing sunroom that was on the right side of that first floor, you can see expands and becomes wider, and that is the space that was the existing deck in front of the front door that becomes incorporated to the first floor living space. And then above that, you can see it's become a flat roof so that it can then be roof deck space from access from the second floor. The two slider openings that you see, the right one is the corner on the second floor that got filled in. So that's all one plane now, and that rectangle, if you will, of the second floor, now it becomes clean and pure in its shape. And then the drawing to the right of that, the top right, you could see this infill from the side. On the lower level, on the first level, you see those two windows. That's that sunroom from the side. Again, same front plane. That doesn't get any closer to reservation terrace, and then the roof deck above it. And then the triple window on the second floor is that new filled in space from the second level. On the bottom left drawing, you can see the back deck rebuilt. It now has, it is now on the first level covered porch, and then on the second floor becomes a small second floor deck to the rear. But again, slightly smaller than the original footprint. All in all, the materials are, are clapboard. They're sort of coastal in their feel. We've got cottage style windows with the 6/1. Again, trying to bring this building back to a more aesthetically pleasing, attractive seaside home. So I think that we have improved that. We like to think that this is a huge improvement for the neighborhood from its eclectic additions that it had over the years, and really simplifying the lines. The additions, to touch on that again, that second floor fill in the corner and that first floor infill add up to 210 square feet of added space. So really a minor addition of increase in square footage. And I believe that's all, but I'm happy to answer any questions regarding the architectural changes.
Thank you, Eileen. Maybe Andy, you could go down to slide 7, which is the assessor's map. So the board needs to review this under the special permit for nonconformities under the Plum Island Overlay District, which is under 21G. And the first criteria there is the proposed change will not be substantially more detrimental to the existing nonconforming structure to the neighborhood or the PIOD. And the second criteria is the change will not cause the structure to be within 10 feet of the side lot line, more than 2 stories or 35 feet in height. So we can deal with the second one first. None of those criteria are triggered by this. We're not doing any, we're not incurring on any of the sidelines that are currently not already there. And it's not going up more than 2 stories. It's only going up to the height that it is, which is 26.4, I believe. it's not more than 35 feet. So the other criteria is whether or not it's substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood or to the PIOD. So there's not going to be any change in occupancy in this proposal. The addition is 210 square feet. And as I noted earlier, and as Eileen noted, the only footprint change is the filling in of some of that deck area that isn't already covered. This plan shows you a couple things. I'm going to show you some photographs shortly. So the green is the plan in front of you for 37 Reservation Terrace. And so, Andy, if you could go to the next slide. So this is the current 37 Reservation Terrace. This is actually some good photographs because you can see where the infill is going to be in the new sunroom, So on the front, and Eileen, you should correct me if I'm wrong, but the photograph to the left, you'll see that the sun porch sunroom gets extended over to the left, over covering that door on the first floor. And then in the middle photograph, you'll see the void on the second floor that gets filled in because you can see the old cottage roof on that actually, where the second floor was kind of plopped down. So that's what the structure currently looks like, and the height's not going to change, the width is not going to change. So if you could go to the next slide, Andy. So the stars on the prior slide, 39 Reservation Terrace is the one right next door. You can see that in the first slide to the left. The center is 1563rd Street. It's the other abutter behind. And 2063rd Street, you can see down the street there a little bit at the size of that structure. And then if you could go to the next slide, Andy. So there's 39 Reservation Terrace, also next door, and 2063rd Street, which is 2063rd Street is one street over behind them. So they're 63rd and Reservation Terrace, as you can look on the My Maps in a second, come into contact, and the house is both on 63rd to the rear, you can see that. And then, so 63rd is the second star back there. And if you could go back to the photograph, thank you. And then 1163rd Street. So you can see that the proposed renovations to this structure actually certainly do not, as compared to the bulk and size and height of the other structures in the nearby area, are not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. And certainly the renovations to this house, as being proposed at 210 square feet, no additional height, and the lot coverage is only increased because of the cover over the deck, essentially, is certainly not more detrimental to the PIOD than the existing structure. I would also note that the applicant provided letters of support from two immediately adjacent neighbors, that being both of the house on 65th Street that abuts to the rear. And Andy, if you go back to the My Maps, I'll show folks where these are. So the house that is on 65th Street, that is the adjacent property. So it's lot 76, map 76-237. We have a letter of support, and then a letter of support from the adjacent abutter at 1563rd Street, which is on the corner lot where that blue star is, on the corner of 63rd Street and Reservation Terrace. The other corner at 65th and Reservation Terrace, owned by Mr. Solomon, that house is for sale, and the abutters have dropped off letters and plans, but he's not been around, and I believe he lives out of state. So they did contact them. And then there are some other letters of support from some other folks in the general area on Plum Island. So we believe that the modest addition and renovations to this structure are not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood or to the PIOD. And we did not trigger any of the first criteria, and we would request the board grant a special permit for nonconformities. Thank you.
Okay, Attorney Mead, was that about it for the presentation?
Yes, sir.
Great. All right, moving on. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak in support of the application? And again, if you wish to speak, just raise your hand, give your first and last name and address. Seeing no hands in support, anyone wish to speak in opposition? Seeing no hands in opposition, we'll close that portion of the hearing and move to questions from the board. Any members of the ZBA have any questions for Attorney Mead, Ms. Graff, or anyone else?
No, this is Mr. Moore. I have one question, and I think it's very visible in the plans, but there will be an additional full bathroom, right, added to this?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
This is Mr. Cameron. Question about what is needed from the Conservation Commission. My understanding is if this is approved by the ZBA, they still need to go to the Concom.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Cameron. Yes, it still does need an order of conditions, and not unlike any, most other applications on Plum Island and older ones. So we had Historic Commission review, ZBA, and Concom review. It's interesting, under the Wetlands Protection Act, it actually requires, if the commission were to enforce it, that the applicant go and apply to other boards and commissions first before they come to the commission. In this instance, it's just how it all fell, given everything that's been happening with COVID and that organizational thing. So it will be going to the Conservation Commission for sure.
Okay. Any further questions? All right, moving to deliberations. And again, we're deliberating the application, which is a special permit for nonconformity. So our deliberation should be framed around the standard, which is that for the board to find this application in the affirmative, it has to determine that it will not be that the proposal will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming use or structure or the PIOT. And again, when making that, we factor in things such as size, scale, massing, volume, as compared to other structures in this part of the Plum Island overlay district and in this part of the Plum Island neighborhood that the application sits in. So deliberations. Who wants to kick things off?
This is Mr. Cameron. Can I go first?
Please.
Rather than all sitting around looking at our screens waiting for somebody. So I'll say I'm in favor of this. I would be interested to hear other deliberatory, that's a word, comment from fellow board members. I am very sensitive to the original intent of the Plum Island Overlay District. Before I really read through this and heard the presentation tonight, I was anticipating that I would be negatively inclined towards this, but essentially it's a very small addition of square footage. I think the current square footage, if you include the basement, which I'm not really sure you should, I don't know, but it's about maybe 1,500 square feet or 1,600 or so if you do not include the basement, and adding 210 square feet doesn't seem like it's getting that much bigger. And it's still keeping the 3 bedrooms and 1 bath. So I think that's true on the bath as well. But so it's not like you're going to be jamming more people in here, or a bigger family moving in there, or more people staying there in the summer if it's a rental. So I think I can support it.
Okay. Anyone else wish to speak in deliberations?
This is Mark Moore. I'll jump off second, I guess. And I would agree with Mr. K. Design and the fit to the neighborhood. I mean, there's no new nonconformity. Just, I think, really doing a nice job at improving the use of the space and the look of the building. So I don't see the building itself, especially when you look at or consider mass and size of adjacent dwellings in the area, a problem at all. So I see it passing that hurdle. So more detrimental to the neighborhood, no. I have a little sticking point on the PIOD, and it was kind of not even thinly veiled. The question was going to be on the extra bathroom. Because to me, when you tick off all the I guess the intent of the PIOD was to reduce damages to private property from floods and ensure public safety during and personal injury during issues, eliminate costs for response and cleanup after floods and issues, avoid loss of utility service. None of these made applied to this house, but there's one that says limit the expansion so as to prevent exacerbation of existing problems with density or intensity of use. And when I see another bathroom go in, that got me thinking, and it's something that I just want to kind of flesh out a little bit, because with respect to the PIOD, there is a fragile water and sewer infrastructure on the island, and adding a second bathroom, I think, puts a chance, I guess, for doubling of water use and a more intense use, maybe through rentals than would normally be done with one bathroom. So that's something I wanted to hear from others in the deliberation. But right now, overall, I think I'm in favor of it, but I do have a little sticking point with this and need to talk through it a little bit more.
Mr. Chair, could I address that if you wouldn't mind? Because I think I can provide some information.
By all means, go ahead, please.
Mr. Moore, I think you raised a really good point, and it's a really important distinction of how one measures intensity on the utilities on Plum Island. So the intensity on utilities is actually measured under the Title V standard, which is the number of bedrooms. So you could actually have 5 bathrooms in a house and 1 bedroom, and you would only be, the intensity would be 110 gallons per day. So the reason that the PIOD capped the number of bedrooms at 3 or 1 more than you currently have, so long as it's no more than 3, is because they did not want to have a system that allowed for more development than current Title V standards would allow. And so it's important to note that the bedroom count did not change, and how you determine what a bedroom is generally is very clear, and that has not changed at all in this development. So it's actually the intensity of use on the utility is based upon the number of bedrooms and not the number of bathrooms under the Title V standard. So I just think that's an important distinction to make, because that, of course, is one of the basics, as you noted, under the PIOD. And it's so important that that limitation is wrapped into the zoning.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Attorney Mead. Anyone else in deliberation wish to speak?
I'd like to make. Go ahead, Stephen.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Hi, this is Ken Swanton. I guess my concern is for the PIOD. In the last Plum Island one we looked at 2 weeks ago, or started a month ago, the FAR was only, I think, 0.15, and it was going up to 0.25 right at the limit. This one's starting out at 0.47, which is like double the density. It's a very small lot. And I think the planning department's right to raise the concern about the density and the PIOD in general. And to take this, I know it's just a small infill in addition, but to have it become even more dense when it's already almost twice as dense as the regulations now provide, I guess that would be a concern for me.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think that I would go back to the standard of substantially more detrimental. In this instance, the intensity seems to jump so much because you're right, Mr. Swanton, the lot is a smaller lot than the one that you deliberated over 2 weeks ago. And that was, much small, not much smaller, but had a much less FAR. This FAR historically is non-conforming. That's what it is. One of the reasons we need to be here is because we're increasing that non-conformity. But the intensity of use in this instance is not to add a bedroom, for example, but to add 210 square feet both on the first floor, a little bit of an entry, and then that infill on the second floor. So I think that when you look at this, the question is it substantially more detrimental? And this is certainly not 210 square feet, or the increase in the FAR is 0.049. And so while it's true, given the size of the lot, it appears to be a jump, the reality is it was already over. And this addition is not substantially more detrimental than that which already existed, would be the applicant's position.
If I could just respond for a moment. I mean, I understand your point. I just think it's a very fragile environment there. And I know in the past, the Zoning Board of Appeals has allowed houses that are too dense to begin with to become even more dense. I'm just questioning whether that makes, if that's good policy going forward and whether we should continue to do that. Just my opinion. I'm not trying to argue it here in deliberations.
Yeah, and I don't mean, and I think you also raise a good point, and I'm certainly not arguing it, putting the case forward. The zoning board they're not policymakers, right? That's the city council's job. And the city council has said, here's the standard for deciding whether or not you can increase or not increase something that's already non-conforming. And one of the standards is substantially more detrimental. So the question is, how is it applied within the confines of the standards that have been adopted?
Okay, let's move along in that dialogue, and thank you, Attorney Mead, for the follow-up as well. I see that Mr. Moore, Mr. Cameron, you have your hand up.
I'm all set. That was from earlier, and I will take it down.
Okay, no worries. So we've heard from Mr. Cameron, Mr. Moore, and Mr. Delisle. Ms. Webb, do you have any comments, deliberations that you want to share?
Just a few. I do not find this proposal to be any more detrimental to the neighborhood. I think it's a very minor proposal that they're showing here, and especially as compared to the other the neighboring parcels by photograph that Attorney Mead shared with us. This seems to be not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, so I am in support of it.
Okay, and Mr. Shannon.
Yeah, I'm also in support of it. I agree with Ms. Webb. I don't feel that it's substantially more detrimental. I like the changes being made, and the fact that it's staying 3 bedrooms. I'm very comfortable with it, so I can support this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shannon. Anyone else wish to speak in deliberations?
Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Delisle. I think you mistook me for Mr. Swanton earlier.
Oh, my apologies.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So I would just chime in and say that I'm inclined to agree with Ms. Webb on this one. I think that this one, I don't see this as being a substantial detriment to the neighborhood. So I can support this application.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Delisle, and just to back clean up, I concur as well. I feel that this is a very minor and reasonable request of a very minor square footage infill without any substantial, certainly not substantially more detrimental change and impact on the neighborhood or the PIOD. So I can support it as well. Do we have a motion from a member of the board?
This is Mr. Cameron. I will make a motion to approve the special permit for nonconformities to 37 Reservation Terrace, 2020-033.
Mr. Moore seconds.
Mr. Cameron made the motion. It's seconded by Mr. Moore. Calling the roll. Mr. Cameron.
Yay.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Ms. Webb.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes.
And Rob Ciampetti, I vote yes as well. That is 6 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the application is approved. Good luck, and thank you, everyone, for your presentation and for your patience. All right.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Moving on to the next application, it is the matter of 35 Oakland Street, J&M Contractors, LLC, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa, LLC. This Matter is docket 035 of 2020, a special permit for nonconformities to construct an addition to a pre-existing non-conforming two-family. May we hear from the applicant, Attorney Mead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Lisa Mead, Midtown Acosta, 30 Green Street in Newburyport, on behalf of Joel Willett, J&M Construction, who is now the owner of the property. It's been a long time since we've been able to get in front of the board on this. There was an advertising problem in the COVID thing, and so we're happy to be here, and now he owns it. He's not just the purchaser. Also with us is David Carey, who is the architect, and I'm going to wait while Andy pulls up the plans. And Mr. Chair, just as a matter of process, and I certainly don't want to tell you your business, but I believe the board has 5 voting members. Is that correct? And not 6?
That's correct.
Okay.
The voting members are Mr. Cameron, Mr. Moore, Mr. Delisle, Ms. Webb, and myself. And then we have 2 alternates, Mr. Channon and Mr. Swanton. And we had originally enlisted Mr. Channon to be a voting member, but that was before Ms. Webb had logged on.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much.
At the outset, I had made that announcement, and then Rachel had jumped in. So that meant that Bud lost his vote.
Sorry, Bud. So thank you. Without pictures, it's hard to see who's doing what. So this is 35 Oakland Street. This is the R2 zoning district. Andy, you actually have a presentation that we provided to you, just like the last one. Thank you. The property is 6,989 square feet, has 59 feet of frontage. The R2 requires 15,000 square feet and 120 feet of frontage for a 2-family. So it's currently a pre-existing non-conforming 2-family use already. The proposal is to construct a 2.5-story addition to the rear of the existing residence, connected by a common wall connector under the ordinance. And so we need a special permit for nonconformities to do that. I might add, Andy, if you could move to the next slide. Thank you. There's an old shed that is on this property. You can see it in the bottom kind of middle of the lot. That will be removed. We went to the Historic Commission, amazingly enough. That shed was looked like it was over 100 years old, and so the Historic Commission did give us permission to demolish and remove that shed. So the R2 district requires a minimum front setback of 25 feet, and we have 20 for the 2-family use. Excuse me, for 2-family use, and the structure actually front yard setback for the structure is actually 4.4, not 20. I apologize. So that's non-conforming. The side yard setbacks are 19.3 on the right side or the top of the screen here, and 8.7 on the lower side. The addition on the back will actually improve as it goes back the side yard setback on the lower part of the screen, as you can see. The height and lot coverage, rear yard setback, open space, and parking are all in compliance with the ordinance and will not come out of compliance with this proposal. So the applicant proposes to construct that 2.5-story addition to the rear of the project and continue to have it used as a 2-family. So what I thought I would do now is turn it over to David, and David can talk to you a little bit about his proposed architecture and the proposed addition as it goes back in the yard.
Thank you, and thanks to the board for hearing us under these circumstances. And what we wanted to do in adding the addition off the rear of the property was to keep in scale with what exists, and to clean up the back portion, which currently with the 2-family use has a pressure treated deck and stairway and a few additions, and a little bit of a hodgepodge of windows on that rear elevation. You're currently looking at the front in the top left existing, which we will keep as is. This is the part we like about it. And certainly the side as well. It's really a nice example of kind of, I guess I'd call it Greek revival or inspired of that era, perhaps later in that. There's a shed dormer up top as well existing, which is fairly low profile, and I'm not sure the date of that addition. If we could go to the rear, the next slide, please, to just show quickly the rear of the existing. That's where the deck comes off of the second unit, which is the second and third floor. There's one unit is on the first floor, the other's on the second and third. That will be removed. There's a small shed structure which accesses the basement. That will also be removed. The lower deck will be removed. And from the other side, you can see a one-story shed structure which remains. The windows toward the rear will change. Now if you move on to the fifth slide, please. On the front, you can see what we're adding to the left side is a dormer that's also in keeping with the scale set back just under 7 feet from each gable end is where the new dormers will occur, and up the roof a couple of feet, 18 inches on one side and a couple of feet on the other side. The addition off the back, what we decided, it's kind of one of those things where too connected becomes a mass, which is too large, and a slight disconnect allows light. And so it's kind of in keeping with the idea of a carriage house, for lack of a better word, connected but with a two-story connection. So it's a 2.5-story main structure, a connector, and a 2.5-story second structure. If you go then to the next slide, this top right is the rear facing elevation of the addition, facing out onto the backyard. And the lower one faces down toward the Merrimack River on the lower left. So again, keeping the shed structure, adding a 2-story connection, and then creating that carriage house structure on the back. This is a perspective view we've taken from looking at it at the main house with the, you can see the one-story addition to the back of the main structure, and then the carriage house behind that.
Thank you, David. So this is also in the DCOD. However, we're taking off less than 25% of the exterior walls, and therefore it doesn't trigger the DCOD. So the only other review was the Historic Commission to remove that shed that you can see in the back of the lot there in the yellow outlined lot. So we're here for a modification to a pre-existing non-conforming structure under 9B2 of the ordinance. And the board needs to find that there is no addition of a new nonconformity, and there isn't. I would reiterate that the structure is actually more narrow than the existing structure from the front. It actually steps in that side setback that's 8.7 to make it 11, and the other side is just about lined up, maybe a little bit inside the front wall on the property. And so the next thing is there's no new nonconformities. The next thing is that the proposed change will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming structure. I think what's important, Andy, if you could just back up 1 minute to my maps for a second. You got ahead of me. So here's the neighborhood. There's a number of 2 families and single families. Mostly they're all in the same size lots on average, whether it's a 2 or a single. But this is not unfamiliar for Oakland Street. And some of the lots, as you can see from these footprints, have bigger, deeper properties or structures on them, and some don't. So what we did was kind of did an analysis of what's around there. And so Andy, you can now go to the next slide. And you'll actually see, so we divided up the single families lot sizes and the 2 family lot sizes. And you can see the 2 family lot sizes are an average of 7,300 square feet. So we're just about under that at 6,900, but pretty close to be right on the middle of the average for the 2 family structures that exist on Oakland Street in this neighborhood. So if you go to the next slide, Andy. So then we did a comparison of lot coverages. So even though we're not exceeding lot coverage, nor are we currently non-conforming for lot coverage, we said, okay, what happens to the lot coverage when we look at this proposal? And so the lot coverage, again, is right at the average. So the current average is actually 21.9. Our proposal is 23. But as you can see, you know, there's a 28, a 34, a 28. And then, of course, there are some smaller ones for 13. That's a more intense use, 13, 16, and 17. So we're not far off from that, and certainly not substantially different than any of the other houses in the neighborhood. So then I thought we'd show you some photographs of the nearby houses in the neighborhood. So can you give me the next one, Andy? So this is actually this structure. And as you can see, it's a narrow house. And so I thought what was interesting is as you go back behind this, the addition is no wider. And in fact, it's a little bit more narrow than the front addition. And so this is the house on the street right now. You can see it's got a significantly sized backyard. And if you go one more slide, Andy. I'm going to show you some other pictures in the neighborhood of some other 2 families that exist right around this location. So the one on the left is down the street towards Merrimack. The one in the middle and the one on the right are on the opposite side of Oakland Street, moving up towards High Street. So we think that based on what we've shown to you, our proposal is certainly not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing non-conforming homes, either 2 family or single family. I would also say to make sure that we received 3 letters of support. And if you go back to the My Maps, Andy, I can tell you where those were from. The 3 letters of support are from the adjacent property at 37. 37 Oakland Street provided a letter of support. 26A and 26B Ting Street, which are in the backyard, provided letters of support. And 33 Oakland Street actually is owned by somebody who doesn't live there. It's rented out. And we provided the letter that was left in the mailbox, hoping to elicit some conversation, but that was never returned. So we believe that based upon the standards set forth in the ordinance, that we certainly know new nonconformity is created, and that the proposed change will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing nonconforming structure. Thank you.
Okay, Attorney Mead, thank you. And was there any further part of the presentation before we?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, great. Moving then on to the next segment. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak in support of the application? And again, just give your name and address and raise your hand using the little hand icon. Seeing, I don't believe, we've got one.
We do have one, yep. Carol? Carol, you'll need to unmute yourself as well if you'd like to speak.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, hi, this is Carol Norton, 37, and we continue to support this.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Norton. Anyone else wish to speak in support of the application? Anyone else wish to speak in support? Seeing Seeing no new hands, moving to the next segment, anyone wishing to speak in opposition or wishing to speak neither for or against, but just have comments, feel free to just raise your hand and feel free to speak your mind. Seeing no new hands in opposition, we'll close that segment of the public hearing and move on to questions from the board. Any member of the ZBA with any questions for Attorney Mead? Any questions for the applicant or anything that we've heard so far?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Rachel.
For Attorney Mead, I'm just, for point of clarification, you said that the existing building is a single unit on the first floor and then it's a second unit on the second and third floors. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what Mr. Curie said, yes.
Oh, sorry. Okay. And then, so what is going to be the new configuration? Is it going to be that the existing building is a single unit and then the new part is a second unit?
I'm going to let David answer that. I believe that's the correct answer. David, are you still on? Rachel?
No, I'm no longer muted. Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And the connector actually that you see there, that's actually the half of that connector is part of the front unit and half of that connector. So the demising wall will basically be between those two little windows.
Okay, and what is the use on the first floor of the addition that is not showing as windows?
The sliding barn door type of?
Yes, what is that? That looks
That's
very
wall.
interesting.
That's actually a wall there. We just kind of dressed it up a little bit. Behind it is a living room. That's living room in the front, dining room to where the windows are, living, dining. Beyond the dining, going back in the other, straight back toward the river is a kitchen. So it's the front, that unit is basically kitchen, dining, living with a lav. The door to the left there is a mudroom entry.
It looks very interesting architecturally.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Seeing no hands from the from.
Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Delisle. What's the currently is this building or is this apartments or is this condos or what is this?
Well, it's not, Mr. Delisle, it's a two-family right now. Mr. Willett bought it to renovate it. So I believe it was rented out.
And once renovated, it will be sold as condos or will it be rented out?
Nope, it will be sold as condominiums.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, a couple more.
By all means, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. What's the footprint of the addition?
Go ahead, Lisa.
I was David, you may have that off the top of your head. I don't have it on mine.
The first floor of the unit 1 is 912 square feet. The addition is 752 square feet. Little less than the main house. The main house gained a little bit of space with, if you're looking at this site plan where you see 35 Oakland Street, the small L shape, the backwards L shape where the entry is and that connects the two is part of 35 Oakland on that first floor. So again, it's kind of subdivided, it's divided. That little connector is basically divided in half where that wall, formerly deck, or it says deck, the wall that goes right through the word deck is part of, the left side is part of the rear unit and the right side is part of the front unit.
So the first floor of the existing structure is 912 square feet. And
Actually, the first floor existing is 807, and the addition on the first floor to that will be 105 as part of that first unit. So the resulting first floor footprint in the front is 912. The rear.
Okay, can I break in for a sec? So you've got 807 square feet is the existing footprint of the current structure. Then that first unit will have 105 square feet of new space.
Correct.
Plus then 752 square feet of new construction in the back.
Correct.
For a grand total of 857 new square feet on the ground floor. So basically the long way around the barn, saying that the addition's bigger than the house.
That, the square foot, yes, yes. The square foot of the first floor, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Footprint wise. Because there's that connector.
Where will the parking be for each of these units? Is the paved areas on both sides of the house to remain?
Yes. Do you see you can see the driveways on both sides? That serves both of them that serves both two units currently, so that won't change.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions from the board? Okay, closing that part of the hearing, we're going to move to deliberations. And again, we're deliberating around the standard of a special permit for nonconformity. So the board needs to make a finding that there will be no addition of a new nonconformity in order to grant the special permit for nonconformities. And also prong two, that the board must find that the application will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing nonconforming use or structure. In use of that, the board may consider factors such as size, scale, massing, volume as compared to the other structures.
Right.
And all of this is subject to section 9B2. I also note that the application appears to trigger the street and sidewalk ordinance, and we haven't heard back from DPS on recommendations. Is that right, Andy and Caitlin? Do we have anything from DPS?
That's right. I haven't heard back yet. I know that Attorney Mead was also checking in with DPS. I'm not sure if she's heard back yet.
No, thank you, Caitlin. No, I asked Jamie to go out and take a look about a week or so ago. I know that he's pretty much out straight. So the applicant would be fine with a condition, as the board has done in the past, that we would comply with the street and sidewalk determination as made by the DPS.
Okay. Thank you, Attorney Mead. All right. So let's jump into deliberations. We'll just start at the top of the batting order. Mr. Cameron, why don't you kick things off if you could?
I was actually going to be quiet this time. Yeah, it's kind of the tail that's going to wag the dog. It's a big addition for sure. Aesthetically, I think it's certainly in keeping with the rest of the neighborhood. I used to live over there, so I'm familiar with a number of properties that before my time had significant additions on them. So generally I'd be in favor of the application.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cameron. Mr. Moore?
I would agree with most of what Mr. Cameron said. It's definitely, in my mind, it doesn't create any new nonconformities, and I don't see it being substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, especially when you compare to the lots, and that's kind of done for us by, to some extent, by the applicant and Attorney Mead, that on that street it is not unusual to have setups like this. So although it is a big change, one structure in back of another, it looks like it's done well, aesthetically pleasing, I think, as one member already said. And key is having letters of support, especially from immediate abutters. So that weighs a lot in favor in my mind.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle?
I'm going to have to take a opposing viewpoint from my two colleagues. I think that while there certainly is not going to be the addition of a new nonconformity, I think that this may in fact be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood based on the fact that, among other things, it is a very large addition, as we heard, larger than the initial structure. I think that presents a problem when we consider the size, the scale, the massing, the volume of the proposed addition, relative not only to the structure itself, but relative to the other structures on Oakland Street, Monroe Street, Jackson Avenue, Jackson Street. I think that you're getting into a pretty large place for that area. And yeah, there are some that are big, but to call out that data that was presented to us on slides 9 and 10, that required almost a walk of the whole street. So I think we're kind of picking and choosing our data points to get the result we want on that. So I think I'm going to have trouble supporting this.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Ms. Webb?
I'm in support of this application. I think, the area is zoned for this kind of use. The lot can accommodate it. It's been presented in a very aesthetically pleasing way. They're using many of the details on the existing home, and I have no objection to this. I think it fits well within the neighborhood, and as Attorney Mead pointed out with her comparative analysis of the neighborhood, that there are similar size projects or similar size structures and uses in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I'll say that, and this is Rob Champetti, I'll just say that I agree with the majority opinion that seems to be forming, that it is, a lot of moving parts, of course, but it doesn't strike me as being substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than pre-existing non-conforming uses or structures. And I don't think there's a new non-conformity either. So I too can support it. With that, do we have a motion? And with any framing of a motion, could you also, whomever makes it, could you include the condition that it is subject to the DPS determination of street and sidewalk, the street and sidewalk ordinance?
This is Mark Moore. I'll make a motion to approve the special permit for nonconformities for 35 Oakland Street, file number 2020-035, with the condition that the applicant will comply with any DPS instructions with respect to street and sidewalk determination.
I'll second the motions. Rachel Webb.
Okay, the motion's been made by Mr. Moore and seconded by Ms. Webb. Calling the roll, Mr. Cameron.
Yay.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
No.
Ms. Webb.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That is 4 in the affirmative. The motion carries and the application is approved on the special permit for nonconformities. Good luck, everyone, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you all very much, too. Have a nice evening.
Thanks. All right, guys, moving to the next matter before us, which is the matter of John Caldwell III, 8 Longfellow Drive, docket 040 of 2020, a special permit for nonconformities to construct a 24 by 40 second-story addition to a pre-existing non-conforming single-family use. May we hear from the applicant?
Hello, and do we have the applicant in attendance? It looks like okay. Looks like the applicant's under a different name in the audience. That's why.
Yeah, I'm recognizing the attendee, Melissa Boulay. I hopefully pronounced that correctly. I see a hand up.
Yep. So Melissa, you can speak if you'd like to unmute yourself on your end.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good evening, everyone. Sorry about that. My name is John Caldwell. I live at 8 Longfellow Drive, and I'm requesting to build a 40 by 24 second floor, second addition on my home.
Okay.
It'll be a 4-bedroom, 1 bath. And I have spoken with 8 of my neighbors, 2 on each side, 3 on the front, and 1 in the rear. And so far, everybody is 100% on board. I need the extra space for my family of 5.
Okay. Could Mr. Caldwell, do you mind? This is Rob Champetti speaking. Would you mind just going into some detail about and you don't have to go into great detail, but just the materials you plan to use and such. I think we see the plan, so we know what it's supposed to look like when it's done.
Yep.
But if you mind just adding a little detail for us, and then we can move things along for you.
Absolutely. So I plan on staying within the current footprint of 24 by 40. I'm just going to go straight up. It'll have, hardy plank siding, cement board siding, which I've already added to my garage, and the entire house that'll have that, and all the windows will be replaced with Anderson 400 series 2/1 Terratone colored windows, which so far from everybody in the neighborhood who I've spoken with, they all really like that idea. And the trim will be PVC trim, and it'll be IKO roofing on it, but it's a very basic addition. It's not going to be overly fancy or overly high or anything like that. It's going to be very fairly modest. My neighbors to my left, if you're looking at the house from the street, went up a couple of years ago. It'll look similar to theirs, but I believe shorter and not as large overall. And yeah, it's very basic. It's not going to be anything too fancy, but I think it'll fit within the neighborhood very well. And it'll be a substantial upgrade to my current look of my house, which hasn't really been upgraded since the 60s. So I think overall it'll be an upgrade in general.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Caldwell. We're going to move on to the next segment of the hearing, and we'll ask for anyone who wishes to speak in support of the application. If you do, please just raise your hand. Seeing no one raising their hand, anyone wish to speak in opposition? Seeing no hands raised, we can close that section of the hearing and move to questions from the board. Any members of the board wish to pose any questions for Mr. Caldwell?
Mr. Caldwell, this is Mr. Cameron. Quick question. So how many bedrooms and bathrooms are there now, and how many will be there if you do this addition?
So right now there's 1 bathroom, 3 bedrooms. And I'm currently looking to add 4 bedrooms upstairs with a 1 full bath. And hopefully in the near future, I'll be able to reconfigure the downstairs, but at the moment it's going to stay the same. And they won't be used as bedrooms. I'll probably use it as an office and a playroom for my children. But
Okay, so right now it's 3 bedrooms and 1 bath. And how many will it be? You've said 4. Will you have 4 in total when all is said and done?
no, upstairs I'm adding 4 upstairs with a full
Adding
bath.
4.
Yep, and then
Okay.
downstairs I would eventually like to just maybe remove some closets and just use it as an office or
Gotcha.
a
Gotcha.
playroom for my
Okay.
children. That's all.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions from the board?
Mr. Caldwell, this is Mr. Moore. Plans look very reasonable here. I just had a question on the 8 neighbors that were all on board. And you mentioned if you're looking at the front of your house, I'm just not sure which way the numbers run. So if you look at the front of the house, the neighbor to your left has the bigger of the houses abutting you when you're facing the house. Did the neighbor to your right, if I'm facing your house, sign off on this?
Yep, the neighbor to my right is Elena Amano. She's older,
Yep.
but she has verbally spoken to me multiple times and told me that she is on board for everything I'm doing, and she loves everything I've done so far because it looks substantially nicer than what has been there. So
Perfect.
and also the gentleman to the right of her told me
Okay.
the same thing. So
Okay, thank you.
no problem.
Okay, anyone else wish to ask any questions of Mr. Caldwell? Hearing none, we will close that portion of the hearing and move to.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh,
can I
sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I clicked in a little late there.
No, apologies. Go ahead.
Mr. Caldwell, I was just curious, what number of the houses in the area are ranch as opposed to two-story homes?
Okay, so 4 Longfellow is a colonial, 6 Longfellow is a ranch, 8 Longfellow, which is currently a ranch, and then 10 Longfellow is now a colonial as well. And then the 2 across the street from me are also ranches on Elizabeth, on either corner of Elizabeth. And yeah, and I'm not sure if it's 1 Longfellow is a colonial as well. So I have 3 colonials directly in the vicinity of my house. On one on the direct right side of mine, if you're looking out at the street, and 1, 2 houses away.
Okay, I understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to pose a question for Mr. Caldwell? Okay, hearing none, we'll close that section of the hearing and go to deliberations. Since we're deliberating a special permit for nonconformities, the board must find 2 prongs of the test and standard for review, which is that there's no addition of a new nonconformity, and also that the application will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming use and structure. When considering that, the board may use factors such as size, scale, massing, volume, as compared to other structures in the neighborhood. This is under 9B2 of the Newburyport zoning ordinance. And I'll also note that the application does not appear to trigger the tree and sidewalk ordinance, so there's no need for us to address that section. We'll just go through the batting order on deliberations. Mr. Cameron.
Yes, I would be in favor of this proposal.
Great, thank you. Mr. Moore?
Yeah, I concur. No new nonconformities, and having checked the neighborhood and then heard from the applicant that there's definitely a mix of homes, ranch to colonials on the street. This is not going to be an outrageous addition for that area, in my opinion. So I don't see it being more detrimental with respect to size and mass. So I can be in support. And again, he has support of his immediate abutters, which is always a plus.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would concur with Mr. Moore. No new conformity, no new non-conformity being added here, and not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, as we have a mix of colonials and ranches in the immediate vicinity. So I think that this project going up a story here is certainly not going to be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Ms. Webb?
I agree with my fellow ZBA members. There's no increase in the footprint here, and there's no addition of any new nonconformities, so I'm in support of this proposal.
Okay, I agree as well. Do we have a motion?
Yes, Mark Moore will make a motion to approve the special permit for nonconformities for 8 Longfellow Drive, number 2020-040.
Second, Mr. Cameron.
Okay, the motion is made by Mr. Moore and seconded by Mr. Cameron. Mr. Cameron?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Ms. Webb?
Yes.
Rob Ciampetti, I vote yes. That is 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries. And good luck to you, Mr. Caldwell. Your application's been approved.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
You have a great night as well.
Thank you.
Okay, moving to the last matter on our docket this evening. This is the application of William Barrett, 3 Q Street, docket 041 of 2020, a special permit for nonconformities to renovate and expand, resulting in an upward extension of a pre-existing nonconforming single-family home. May we hear from Mr. Barrett?
Yes, hello, can you hear me now?
We can, Mr. Barrett. You can go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and all board members. Yes, I am here representing Mark Drago. He's the owner of the property. And this is a proposed reconstruction of 3 Q Street. Q Street is currently developed with a 1 3/4 story home. And there's a wood pile foundation under the existing dwelling currently. The lot, according to recent survey, is 4785. existing home has 1,104 square feet under the roof. It is on piles, however, the home is entirely skirted to the ground. The existing lot coverage is 1,520 square feet or 31.7%. The owner of the property also owns the 2 lots on the other side of Q Street. And if you could bring up the site plan, I think it's, I'm not seeing it near a line of plans. Is it number 3? And what about that? Yeah, right there. Okay, so on the other side, Q Street, there was 2 lots now combined into one because he's purchased those lots. They compile another 4,705 square feet. Q Street is an unimproved way that cannot be reached by vehicle or as a pedestrian, as there are structural impediments along the way. For instance, the abutting neighbor, as you can see to the east, has a structure that crosses over Q Street. Talk about the work that they'd like to do here. This project started out as a remodeling of an existing structure. After the owner dug into the project, he determined he would like to add a second floor or a portion of that over the second floor. Thereby, this application for special permit for non-conformities. The new scope of work is to add to the second floor over a portion of the existing structure, not the entire existing structure. All new living areas will be located entirely over that existing structure. So nothing on the ground floor will be touched as far as expanding the building. The existing fireplace chimney will increase from 4 square feet to 10 square feet of coverage. We'll be moving the rear door, exit door from the east wall to the west wall. Due to this action, that access will have a small platform step of approximately 18 square feet at its entrance. Previously, there was the basement access in this same location. That access will be removed as well as the concrete wall it was built on. We will be removing 300 square feet of concrete slab that's between the 2 buildings. You can see it's labeled there. And that will reduce the lot coverage from 31.7 down to 21.9. As a result of this expansion, the building height will increase from 13.5 to 20.3. This is well below the potential height under the zoning ordinance, as you know. We'll be increasing the second floor square footage by 419 square feet. On the interior, we're keeping the 2 bedrooms. Currently, there's one on the second floor, one on the first floor. We'll be moving one of those bedrooms to the second floor and adding a bathroom on that second floor. Intensity of use would be the same under this proposal. Given the facts stated above, it is our belief the proposed changes will not be more detrimental to the area or to the PIOD, since the area is surrounded by homes of similar design and structure. In fact, in spite of these changes, this home will be significantly smaller in structure than most of the surrounding homes. The additional square footage will not change the distances to the lot lines, as it will be entirely over the existing structure. The existing structure is a 1.5-story home, and we'll be making it a full 2-story home. The new building height will be at 20.3 feet. Given these changes, this building will still be significantly smaller than most of the buildings in this area. Q Street, P Street, S Street, is the surrounding areas. We believe that given these changes, the impact is very little. By adding the second floor, increasing that level second floor. We are making improvements to the lot by removing non-poor structures and by planting the dune grass. At this point, we'd ask the board to act in the affirmative to issue a special permit for the work proposed in this application. And that'll be it. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them for you.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Barrett. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak in support of this application? Seeing no hands. Any members of the attendees audience wish to speak in opposition to the application? Seeing no hands, I'll close that segment of the hearing and move to questions from the board. Any questions for Attorney Barrett by members of the ZBA?
This is member Cameron. I have a question. So how many bedrooms are there right now, and how many would be if this proposal is approved?
There are currently 2 bedrooms, one downstairs, one upstairs, and there will be continued 2 bedrooms, both of them upstairs.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Mr. Moore, any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Barrett, this is Mr. Moore.
Yes.
You mentioned that and I'm just as curiosity right now, it could be brief. It's unreachable, yet it lists parking spaces. Can you explain that, how that worked?
Yeah, and if you go back to the site plan, pane 3, you'll see an easement coming in from P Street. You can't see P Street on there, but you'll see easement right below the house that comes in from P Street. So your access is from P Street. There's an easement provided by the existing house to the right of that easement.
Now I see it. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Any further questions? Mr. Delisle?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Barrett, could you, we walked through this on an earlier application. Could you walk me through the FAR and the increase in the FAR? Because I think that we end up in the proposed dimensional controls going over the required 25% for the FAR. So could you take me through that, how that works?
Yeah, the existing FAR is 22.1. The proposed is 30.9 percentage points. Required dimensional controls are 25, as you know, which is the reason we're here before the board looking for a special permit for nonconformities, increase in nonconformities.
Any other?
Could I ask a follow up in there? Could you just go through with me the existing floor area and the proposed floor area?
Yeah, and if you could bring up the existing floor plan. Okay, the top plan is your existing plan of the building. As you can see, you've got a kitchen area out to the street side or the easement side of the lot. The family room pretty much takes up the whole other side of that building structure. And then you've got a small bedroom with a bathroom on the east side of the structure. This room to the Queen Street side apparently was a porch at one point. Was now incorporated into the living area.
Hey, wait, what's the total area of that?
That's 855 square feet. Same proposed as it will be in the same existing as it will be in the proposed plan.
And okay, so is the FAR is going up because of the additional second story structure?
It's all upstairs, and if you bring up the second floor plan, you'll see there's no bedrooms, or the existing plan. You can see there's a bedroom downstairs. In the proposed plan, you will see that there is no bedroom on the first floor. There are 2 bedrooms upstairs.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Webb, any questions?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
I have no questions either. So we'll close that portion of the hearing and move to deliberations. And again, this is a special permit for nonconformity, so the board must find that the proposed changes will not cause the structure to be within. I'm sorry. The board must find that the application will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming use or structure or the PIOD, because this is in Plum Island. I will also note that the application does not appear to trigger the tree and sidewalk ordinance. There is one side note that we should note, and that is that the applicant has submitted to the Conservation Commission and has yet to receive a DEP number. And the commission can't issue their order of conditions without the DEP number. So we would, in order to proceed, make any approval subject to the issuance of a DEP number and the issuance of an order of conditions. But that kind of goes without saying, and I just note it for the record. All right, so we'll go into the normal batting order for deliberations. Mr. Cameron, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to pass. I'd like to hear what my fellow members think.
Okay, Mr. Moore.
Let's jump off here. Well, given that my bathroom argument was taken care of earlier with respect to the intensity portion of the evening, the biggest concern, it's no new nonconformities, I guess, except the FAR increase, but that primarily comes from adding a second floor, which the PIOD permits. So that's all that's where the math is coming from. So as proposed, I think it's an improvement. I don't see it being any more detrimental to the neighborhood, given the from what I can tell, are the buildings in the surrounding area at that area of the island. So I'm basically in support.
Okay, Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can support this application. I don't see any real problems here. I appreciate Mr. Barrett walking me through the math with respect to the FAR calculation. So I think that this application appears to be a good application, and I can support that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Delisle. Ms. Webb?
I'm in support of this application. I really don't have anything additional to add. My colleagues have all said it previously.
Thank you, Ms. Webb. Rob Ciampetti, I concur with what seems to be the majority and can support it as well. Circling back to Mr. Cameron.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'll be supporting.
Okay, very good. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion. This is Mr. Cameron. Motion to approve the special permit for nonconformities for 3 Q Street, file number 2020-041.
Second to Mr. Moore.
Okay, motion's made by Mr. Cameron and seconded by Mr. Moore. I'll call the roll for the vote. Mr. Cameron?
Yay.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Ms. Webb?
Yes.
And Rob Ciampetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The motion carries. The application is approved for the special permit for nonconformities. Good luck to you, Mr. Barrett, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and board members. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
Have a good evening, sir. Okay, so members of the Zoning Board of Appeals and those in attendance, that concludes the business of and the agenda for the ZBA meeting for May 26, 2020. With no further business on our docket, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Second, Mr. Cameron.
Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor, you can just respond in the affirmative by, you can all say aye. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion carries and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, and thanks very much for the patience.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye, guys.
Good night, all.